So when we proclaim the name of Jesus, power is released.
Welcome to New Dawn Community Church, the message of the week with Pastor Randall Cutter.
So if you'll open up your Bibles to the book of Luke, today we are in chapter 17 of the book of Luke as we are moving forward on what is going on as Jesus is still on his way to Jerusalem. We were introduced to that topic a long time ago, that Jesus was actually on his way to be able to present himself in Jerusalem, and that's what it became, a presentation, an examination where the Lamb who was without defect or blemish presented himself to the spiritual leaders of Jerusalem and was tested throughout the entire week before his suffering and death, once again to prove that he was the Lamb without spot or blemish, who could be sacrificed for the sins of the world. And he was on his way. While he's on the way, Luke is giving us insight into the type of things that he was teaching to his disciples and to those who were around him, because he was the focus of a great deal of attention. If it wasn't for the miracles, besides the miracles, I should say, it was because of his teaching, which was bringing freedom to people. It was lifting them out of the darkness of religious fogginess into the clarity of relationship with God. And that was changing the hearts of the people. For those who were committed to religion rather than relationship with God, Jesus was a massive threat. And Jesus continually had to meet that problem. He was teaching about money in Luke chapter 16, and the Pharisees responded in a very negative fashion. We studied that last week, where in chapter 16 it says that the Pharisees who love money began to ridicule him. Well, when you realize that the Pharisees love money, what do you know about the Pharisees? The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, which means that stronghold in their heart, that altar to money, corrupted everything else that they did. Remember that once we're told in Scripture that bitterness, a root of bitterness, taints everything in our lives. Love of money does the same thing. When we have idolatry in our hearts, that idolatry is like a grid through which we see everything. And we actually think that we're thinking logically and rationally, and we may be, but our premise is wrong. And because our premise is wrong, we are headed in the wrong direction. That's how deceitful our own hearts can be. So as Jesus is going along, he confronts the Pharisees and tells them, the things that they are doing wrong. That was last week. He started to go after how the love of money had corrupted them in so many ways, including in their divorcing, how often they divorce their spouses, and mentioned last week that because we don't live in a dowry system, we don't realize how profitable it was to have multiple, marry someone, take the dowry, divorce them, marry someone, take the dowry, divorce them. And because you could divorce with cause, after all, she did burn my dinner. And I'm not kidding. That was written by one of the rabbis. You could divorce your wife with cause if she did anything displeasing to you. Now, when we do marriage counseling, we say expect the first 5 years of your marriage to be a time where you're getting to know how to be able to sacrifice and lay down your life on behalf of one another, because you find out you're living with this other human being who has his or her own will. And so there's going to be things that you run into that might be displeasing to you. That's not a cause for divorce. That's a cause for dying to yourself and figuring out how to make it work. That's one of the beautiful things about marriage, because you learn that it's not all about you. Then God gives you kids and you really learn that it's not all about you. Anyway, so Jesus is confronting the Pharisees. He's talking about all the sin in which they get involved, and then he tells the story of Lazarus and the rich guy. Lazarus laid at the rich guy's gate, and he was longing for the food that fell from this overindulgent rich man's table, and the guy was so hard-hearted he wouldn't even give Lazarus the crumbs. They die. rich man's in hell, well, Hades, and looking across the chasm that is there. Now, remember the Old Covenant mindset of what Sheol was. Because of the fact that before Jesus came, no one could go into the presence of the Father because none of the sin had yet been paid for. There was a place of the dead. And on one side was the place paradise. That's where Abraham and Lazarus were. On the other side is the place where the rich guy was, and, well, formerly rich guy because you don't take it with you. And he was in torment. And so Jesus tells this story, and we studied it last week, and of course it's available on the web if you weren't here last week. But Jesus is done telling the story, and you could really be thinking, these Pharisees, wow, nasty, nasty people. If you were one of the disciples, you could be thinking, give it to him, Jesus, give it to him. And Jesus never fosters that type of attitude. It was never about the other guy. You may have to confront someone who's caught in sin, but it's not because they're bad, it's because it's your Christian duty. Because you have life, you can reach out to those who are in darkness. And so Jesus preempts that particular attitude, and at the same time, he helps us understand very clearly that this Christian walk that we're involved in, it's not all about us. It's about him. It's about his will for our lives. And so because of that, we're going to be able to learn a little bit about how we can adjust our expectations along the way. Today's message, I've simply entitled it, Managing Our Expectations, because there's a couple of different areas that we need to manage our expectations. If someone is caught in sin, they're not our enemy. That's the wrong way of looking at them. If our expectation is that God's going to continue to smack them, that may be wrong, because he may be wanting to use us to reach out to bring them back. And he's also managing our expectation about the fact that, when we serve God faithfully, not like those people that are always getting caught in sin, we should be treated better. We should have things going more right. Now, by the way, there are laws of reaping and sowing, and certainly that can happen. However, he's going to help us understand from his perspective how things work. We are in Luke chapter 17, verses 1 through 10 today. The scripture which I'm going to project is my translation of Luke 17, 1 through 10, as it has been throughout the book of Luke. If you have your own Bible along with you or your electronic device with it on, I'd encourage you to open up to your favorite Bible translation just to see the differences, the nuances of how I translate and your favorite translation does. So we are in Luke chapter 17, verse 1. Jesus, after he has just told the story of the rich man and Lazarus and how that rich man's, his life choices had created some very difficult afterlife circumstances for him. And then he said to his disciples, it is not possible to avoid the things that cause people to stumble into sin, but woe to him through whom it comes. So he's shifting the topic a little bit. He wants his disciples to learn a lesson, because by this time, the disciples are going, ooh, give it to that rich guy, give it to that rich guy, give it to the Pharisees. Yeah, good job, Jesus, good job. You know, it is that self-righteous thing that rises up in us. We'd like to say it isn't there, but it can be. And so Jesus quickly goes to the disciples and starts to teach them about something of which they need to be aware for themselves. In their anger with the Pharisees, they literally could become a stumbling block to the Pharisees. They were being shaped and built so that after Jesus rose again and ascended into heaven, he was going to send them to the Pharisees, to the religious leaders. In fact, it says in the book of Acts, many of the priests became followers of the Lord Jesus in that early time in the book of Acts. And so if these guys had an axe to grind against the Pharisees, if they had not gotten their hearts right, they were going to have a hard time fulfilling their calling and role. And so Jesus does some attitude adjustment right along the way. And he tells the story about the stumbling block. He said it's not possible to avoid the things that cause people to stumble into sin, but woe to him through whom it comes. Now, some of your translations say it's not possible to avoid stumbling blocks. The Greek word is scandalon. It really is the lever on a mousetrap. You know, that type of lever that's on a mousetrap where, it's sitting there and all of a sudden that's the scandalon. You trip it and the trap is sprung. And that's the way that life works. It's kind of, we trip over things. There's levers that we trip over and we step into things. And stumbling blocks are the things that cause us to stumble into sin. Now, by the way, when we stumble into sin, it's still our choice, but sometimes we're taken by unawares. And it's like if you know a temptation is coming, you're prepared for it. Oh, I'm about to walk into that situation with Uncle so-and-so. And so you gird yourself. Want so-and-so, whatever, a relative, a friend, someone who has a tendency to always get you into a place where you are on the defensive or things are difficult. And you walk in and you're prepared. You walk in and you're spiritually strong and you can handle it. And then there are those situations where you just trip over something and you're just not prepared. You haven't been thinking about it. And all of a sudden what's on the inside comes out and you surprise yourself again because what's on the inside isn't as nice as you thought it was. And the Lord's just reminding you that it's still by grace through faith that you're saved, and gives you something to repent about and work on. But that's the whole picture of a stumbling block is there. And so Jesus says this. It's just an honest assessment of the world in which we live. It's not possible to avoid the things that cause people to stumble. It's not possible to avoid all of the stumbling blocks. That means our feet get dirty. It's interesting. The word is stumbling block. That we translate it that way because it's the idea of you're walking along, all of a sudden you trip. You stumble into something. And remember on the night that Jesus was betrayed, when his disciples came in, he washed their feet. And these two pictures tie together if you think about it, because when he got to Peter, Peter said, "Oh no, Lord, you have to wash, number one, you're not going to wash my feet." And Jesus said, "Well, if I don't wash your feet, you have no part with me." And he says, "Oh, then wash, take me out and dunk me somewhere." And Jesus says, no, you're fine. You're already clean because you're connected to me. You just got feet that get dirty. And that's a picture of what it is when we walk in this life. Our feet get dirty. And when you think about what they walk through on a daily basis, and the manure of the street and all the dust and all the things, they needed their feet washed. Just like we need our spiritual feet washed because we walk through a world that is filled with manure, filled with stumbling blocks that we can trip over. So Jesus said it's not possible to avoid the things that cause people to stumble into sin, but make sure that you're not one of them. Don't be a stumbling block. So here were the disciples probably working very diligently to not be snickering at the way that the Pharisees were taking these spiritual hits, and they were feeling self-righteous and at the same time more than likely creating a barrier that the Pharisees would have to climb over eventually, and the Lord wants to make sure that his disciples don't become stumbling blocks to other people to come into the kingdom or to become stumbling blocks in any other way. So he says, stumbling blocks are going to be around, just make sure that you're not one of them because it's not good. Woe to him through whom it comes. You don't want to be a stumbling block. Woe is not a word that you want to have describing your life. What do you do? Put that as your epitaph on the tombstone. Woe! No, that wouldn't be good. We were singing about the song today about the resurrection and the thing that Mark was singing to that song and the thing that everyone was cheering because our body, no grave's going to be able to hold me. So we like themes that are like resurrection, see you in a bit, whatever. Woe isn't good. And Jesus says, whoa, don't be a stumbling block. Okay, verse 2. It would be better for him if a millstone were placed around his neck and he were thrown into the sea rather than causing one of these little ones to stumble into sin. This is not quite what he said in Matthew 18:6. In Matthew 18:6, he actually had children with him, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. Here, he's just with a group of disciples walking on their way to Jerusalem, and so the little ones is obviously the people around him that he's looking at. There's children are not in view at this point, in a very clear way anyway. They could certainly be included, but this is a much wider application that he's talking about. Here's the harsh truth. If you're a stumbling block, the punishment is bad. How bad is the stumbling block? How bad is the punishment? It'd be better for you to drown, to die a difficult death, than it is to be a stumbling block. Now think about what that says. It would be better for a person to be executed by having, you have to see the picture. It's because of the fact that millstones usually had a central hole, and the picture is, in the Greek, of putting it around their neck. So they're wearing the millstone, and then toss them in the sea. That's the picture. Now, it doesn't work well for us. We're not really used to millstones all that much. This is the size of the millstone he's probably talking about. That one has a lever on it that you use to grind whatever grain is underneath it. And so that particular picture gives you the idea. You put one of those around your neck and try to swim, you're not making it. This is Matthew 18:6. I already mentioned this. When he had little children, and this is in general, if you do this thing with stumbling blocks and cause people to stumble into sin, in general, it's bad. You'll get a millstone. But if you do it with children, if anyone causes one of these little ones who believe in me to stumble, and he had put a child in front of him, it would be better for him that a large millstone, not just a millstone, a large millstone be hung around his neck and be thrown into the open sea. Now, the millstone that Jesus was talking about in Luke is about that size. The millstone that he was talking about in Matthew is the kind that a donkey would. Now, this one, when he says attached, more than likely, the picture that the people around him had of you being yoked to the side of it, and then that whole thing is thrown into the sea. Well, you're not going anywhere. You're obviously, that's a big one. You can see that little right corner. I got a picture of a guy standing next to a millstone. So you get the idea of the perspective. In the first picture, it's just the arm that can actually turn the millstone. In this picture, when you're talking about little children, it's a big deal. So Jesus is upping the ante in Matthew. He's saying in the book of Luke, he's saying, don't be a stumbling block for anyone. That's bad, and it would be like, it'd be better for you to have, this millstone about this big tied around your neck and be thrown in the depths of the sea. When he's talking about children, it's like he makes it, you're still just as dead, but the idea of how severe the judgment is this is as big as you are. This is how displeasing it is to God. So, a couple of thoughts on that. It's very important for us to do what we can not to put stumbling blocks in front of other people. It just is. And sometimes we don't even know that we're doing it, but when we find out, we can adjust our behavior so that we are not causing people to stumble into things. Sometimes it's just by encouraging in ways that are inappropriate for Christians anyway. If we're telling coarse jokes or whatever, we can be opening the door for people to walk through them. God forbid we're telling people to be unethical, because if we're telling them to be unethical, we are the definition of a stumbling block. Okay, we say, oh, no, you don't need to declare that. You don't need to do that. You don't need to, and whatever. Okay? Yeah, you can get away with that. That's the definition. You're encouraging someone to do something that is not in their best spiritual interest. It's interesting, in Matthew chapter 18, he's talking about children. And this one, as a parent, is one that I think of because parents are the ones who can present the biggest stumbling blocks to their children, because they're always with them. This is a real message to parents. When Jesus puts a little child in front and says, think about the size of the millstone he's talking about. That talks about how he views parental responsibility. One of the big ways that we can cause children to stumble is by not teaching them to gather together with brothers and sisters in Christ, and where they can learn in Sunday school and all of those things. And so it's very important. Christian parents. I'm not talking about pagan parents because they're going to be pagans, but he's talking to covenant people. And he's saying, as a covenant person, don't do these things which are going to hurt the ability of your kids to go forward, or anyone else, as we get back to the context of Luke 17. So Jesus comes out and he says to the disciples, who are kind of cheering him on without any doubt in their hearts, as he's taking on the Pharisees, he tells them this story, and they're probably thinking, what's he talking about? And then he comes to the punchline. He says, be concerned about yourself. Some of your translations, watch yourself, guard yourself. He's looking at them. He said, so instead of looking at the Pharisees, you look at yourselves. Don't point at others. Make sure that you're paying attention to where you're at. Be concerned about yourself. If your brother sins, rebuke him. And if he repents, forgive him. And if he sins against you 7 times in a day and returns 7 times saying, I repent, you will forgive him. You get the sense of that will? You will. Some of your translations translate it must. It's actually a future verb, but they translate it must because that's you can use the future to go, you will do this. Sometimes your parents did that while you were growing up. You will go out and mow the lawn, and it's not a prophecy. And it's not. There's a clear must involved in it, implied. So he's saying to the disciples, he's saying, now, by the way, you've just heard me taking on the Pharisees. Don't become one by pointing at them. You have to be able to be someone who's not a stumbling block. How do you not be a stumbling block with people that irritate you? Because the Pharisees were more than irritating. The Pharisees made life extremely difficult for the normal people in Israel. And they would become one of the primary movers against the disciples when the disciples ended up being the ones who would take the message forward after the resurrection of Christ. So Jesus gives them their marching orders, if you will. They're supposed to pay attention to themselves, and then he talks about, here's how you're going to do this. Number one, you're going to confront the people around you who are involved in inappropriate, and the people around you means your brothers and sisters in Christ. You can confront pagans all day long, and there are things that you can confront them over, but don't expect them to respond to you very good because of the fact that you've got Christian principles to apply to their lives. When you confront a Christian, you're able to say, that there's some things that the Bible says. You say that to someone that doesn't know the Lord, and they're going to look at you and go, huh? That's what you believe. That doesn't apply to me. And you might be able to make ethical arguments or whatever and be able to work with them. However, to be able to say, I don't think Jesus would be pleased with that, is not going to impact someone who doesn't know Jesus. And so Jesus is talking to his covenant people. By extension, he's talking to his disciples who would be working after he had risen again. And so there would be the second covenant people. And he's saying to them, hey, if you've got a problem with a brother, and the picture is of a fellow believer, if you've got a problem, you make sure that you're reaching out to them. Don't become a stumbling block to them. Don't put up a wall between you and them, because then you'll be the stumbling block. You don't often think of it that way, do you? If you don't forgive somebody and they know you're not forgiving them, you're the stumbling block. If you have a problem, if someone sins against you, you confront them, you rebuke them. Doesn't mean you come in and, we get the idea of the word rebuke. I was thinking of using a different word just to soften it a little bit, but the word really is rebuke, but our idea of rebuke is standing on a chair shouting at someone sometimes. That's not how you rebuke somebody. How you rebuke somebody is you approach in meekness and humility, and you let them know that what they're doing is not good for them or the people around them. And you do it in all of humility, identifying as much as you can with the behavior. I've had that problem in the past too, where I was, you just make sure the person knows you're not going you, you're going we. We as people have this problem, and this is how we can rise above it as God's people. And that's rebuke, that's confrontation. And the idea is to be able to say, and we can get beyond this. The Lord has provided a way for us to move beyond this particular sin. He has forgiven us. He's given us the Holy Spirit to empower us so that we can leave sin behind in our lives. And the person says, I repent. And Jesus says, hey, if he repents, you can forgive him. And you're thinking, oh, good, thank God that's done. And then if he sins against you 7 times in a day, doesn't that sound unreasonable? Wait a minute, 7 different times in one day? I think Jesus is using a bit of hyperbole because you'd have to be very busy in your obnoxiousness to actually sin against someone in, 7 times a day. And then be forgiven and do the same thing over and then again and then do the same thing over. And so Jesus is just driving the point home. Because, we think we get, by the second time we're saying, wait a minute, you need to be more sincere about this. By the third time we think you're kidding. By the 4th time we're saying, no way. And he's saying, if he repents, because what he's talking about is sins of weakness, where the person has to change their patterns. There's a pattern that has to change in their lives. That's, by the way, how we overcome. when we've got a pattern of sin in our lives, a pattern of expression in our lives. I was talking about this, I think, on a Friday night a couple of weeks ago. I have a squad in this congregation that makes sure that I do not fall into negative speech patterns. I did not anoint this squad, they just suddenly developed. They're called family. I did not know the Lord was giving me this type of squad when not children were growing up, but they will remind me of speech patterns that I am falling into that would be good to excise from my vocabulary as I am speaking publicly. So you can all thank them for that if there's an irritating speech tick that I get into, because they will alert me to that. And this is what happens. As soon as they alert me, from then on, when I use that particular phrase or way of expressing things, instantly in my head I'm thinking, oh, I just used it. Now, at first, what they said makes no difference, because I've got the knowledge, but I haven't been able to start working on it. But when I am working on it, when I'm alerted to it, suddenly in my head there's like this little flag that goes off when I catch it. And I go, oh, I can't use that. And it's the same thing that happens in any area of our life, any pattern that we're trying, including sin, that we're trying to step away from. It doesn't mean that we're not going to, after we apologize, after we repent, after we agree. Remember, repentance is agreeing with God that He's right, you're wrong in this particular area of your life. And it implies action, it implies apology if someone's confronting you, certainly. And so at a certain point, as someone's going along, all of a sudden it's like, oh, I just did it again. But that's part of the sanctification process. That's how we get cleaned up. We're reminded of it. And you all know this. You've gone through this in your lives. I'm just telling you something that you're involved in already, but this is the way it works. So is it possible that someone could, on the same day, offend you 7 times as they are getting a handle on this thing? And the answer is, of course, yes. So Jesus says you go through the process of confrontation and forgiveness, and you do it as often as is necessary. Repeat often. Of course, you can't read this particular section without also remembering what Peter said in Matthew 18 when Jesus approached them. Then Peter came to him and said, Lord, how often can my brother sin against me and I have to forgive him? 7 times? But Jesus said, I tell you, not 70 times, but not 7 times, but 77 times. So Peter was just making a statement saying, Lord, I'll be generous, I'll forgive people 7 times. And Jesus says in Matthew 18, no, you got to forgive them as often as it's needed. In the book of Luke, when he brings the topic up on the way to Jerusalem, he says, if it's 7 times in a day, you forgive them 7 times in a day. In Matthew 18, Peter's singing 7 times total. And you go home and you mark the calendar every time you forgive. Yeah, that's 1. They're at 6 now. Oh, I got 1 more time. And no, that's not the way it's supposed to work. So, next verse, 5 and 6. Then his disciples said to the Lord, they're listening to him say they have to forgive 7 times. Then his disciples said to the Lord, increase our faith. But the Lord said, if you have faith like a mustard seed, you can say to this mulberry tree, be uprooted and be planted in the sea, and it will obey you. It's interesting, Luke refers to Jesus as the Lord, and when Luke uses that as the narrator, it's Christ the Lord coming back from Luke chapter 2. An angel of the Lord appeared in Luke 2, and they called him Christ the Lord, and so Luke is clearly telegraphing the authority and the life of the second person of the Trinity shining through Jesus. And so the disciples have heard this incredibly difficult thing that Jesus is telling them to do so that they do not become a stumbling block. And their response to the Lord is increase our faith. Because they understood right away. They're looking at this going, man, we need to grow in our faith to be able to have any expectation that this is going to take place. And so how did he answer their response? Their question is, Lord, increase our faith so we are able to forgive people. And Jesus says, if you have faith like a mustard seed, you can do this particular miraculous act. And what he's saying is it doesn't take much faith to do great things. I mean, in the context of forgiveness, he's recognizing it takes faith to be able to forgive people, because you have to believe that God is able to work in their lives in the way that he worked in your life. You have to believe that the harm that they are doing to you is something that God can make up for and make right. That's why they said, give us more faith, because we are not there right now. Remember, they were taught in a culture and society where forgiveness just wasn't something you gave very often. They were taught by the rabbis 2-3 times tops. And Jesus is trying to change their expectation. They recognize immediately that they needed more faith in this particular area. And Jesus says, this doesn't take much faith. I mean, in fact, with a little bit of faith, you can take a mulberry tree. And you can say, be uprooted and be planted in the sea. And it doesn't take much faith to do great things. The mulberry tree, not a small tree. In Matthew 17, the disciples came to Jesus privately and they asked why they couldn't cast out a demon. Why were we not able to cast it out, he told them? Because you have little faith. I tell you the truth, if you have faith like a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it'll move. There'll be nothing that you are unable to do. Now he was going beyond the mulberry tree. Mulberry tree mountain, hey, we think that's a huge difference. He said mustard seed is all you need. It's not that big of a deal to be able to do this sort of thing. By the way, a mulberry tree looks something like that. It's not a small tree. That's a particular type of mulberry tree. They also have one that's called a weeping mulberry with bigger leaves, and they go down rather than up and all of that. But it's not a small tree, and it has a root system that would be hard to uproot. And this is probably something that the farmers that were around him would have said, oh man, a mulberry tree, wish I could do that. Because when you had to take out one of these trees, it was a bit of work. And so if you could just look at it and say, be uprooted and go plant yourself in the sea, that'd be pretty convenient. And so Jesus is telling them about the potential of their faith, even as he's teaching them that their faith can do far more than just forgive people. It's kind of odd, isn't it? They're asking for something that is about relationship, and he tells them something about the real power of their faith. It's like he's saying, guys, if you can do something like this, you certainly can do something like this. And we think, well, I'd really like to do something like this. And the point is, do something like this. Forgive people. Forgive people. Now, go practice on your mulberry trees too. Your neighbors, maybe. No, that's a joke. Don't. I mean, think about the EPA statement if you try to move a mountain. Put it in the sea. Think about all the stuff you've just put in the sea. Think about that. It'd be... Man, especially if they were planting on that mountain. Now you got all that fertilizer in the sea. It would be just difficult. Next verses. Which of you, here's managing expectations. Which of you, if you have a servant plowing or tending the sheep, when he has come in from the field, says to him, sit down immediately and eat your meal? Wouldn't you instead say to him, prepare something so that I can eat my meal? Then change your clothing and serve me while I am eating and drinking. When I'm done, you may eat and drink. So, Jesus is letting them know that their expectations and his expectation are a couple different things. They're saying, increase our faith so that we can forgive. And Jesus is like, you guys got more ability inside of you. You're just not believing it. And then he says, I want to help you understand some things about how you live your life. Here's kind of what we think. We think that when we do some spectacular act of power, that God's going to respond to it in a way that elevates us. He's going to somehow acknowledge it. You know, when you pray for someone and you see that they're miraculously healed, our expectation is, oh my goodness, I am stepping into a new ministry of miraculous healing, Catherine Kuhlman's level of ministry, here I come. And Jesus is trying to help us with expectation, and he's letting us know, hey, you know, if you are involved in forgiving people, don't expect that your whole life is going to change overnight. In fact, you may have to learn really well to keep forgiving them. And so whatever you're doing, whatever acts of faith that you're doing, he wants to help us understand some things about it. So this is about managing our expectations. He says, and by the way, this was a common scene. A household, it wasn't a big household that he's painting or portraying right now. It's probably a household with one servant in it. In that culture, that servant would probably have been a slave of some type, but remember, in Jewish culture, it could be a fellow Jewish person who is just in economic bondage for 5 years, paying off a debt or whatever. Far different than what it was in the United States. So we usually translate it as servant to communicate that this is not at all like what the United States went through or what other countries have since then. Where they make people slaves for life. This is someone's servant who has an economic agreement, either paying off a debt or getting paid. So that servant, probably the only one in the household, is out plowing, tending sheep, doing whatever, and when he comes into the field, he says, which one of you would say to your servant, hey, sit down and eat your meal while you're still hungry? And you're the one paying him. Right? No, that's not what you do. You say to your servant, hey, go ahead and prepare me something, and then get changed. You're kind of a mess. You've been out working in the fields. Get cleaned up, and then come back and make sure that I have a pleasant dining experience, because that's their job. They were hired for that. They are a part of that household for that. So the servant is supposed to fulfill their duties. Their duties come first. That's the whole picture. Everyone in the crowd would be going, oh, yeah, that's right. That's the way it works. That was common sense to everyone there. Of course, this is exactly the way it works. And so Jesus then goes and applies it. He does not show special favor to his servant because he does the things assigned to him. It is the same with you. When you have done all the things assigned to you, say, we are undeserving servants. We have only done what we are under obligation to do. And that's where he is applying it. By the way, some of your translations say he would not thank his servant. The Greek word charis is used. It can be translated grace. It can be translated favor. The picture is he may say thank you because that's polite. But he's not going to show extra favor or grace to the servant just because his servant is doing the job that he was hired to do. He's fulfilling what he's supposed to do. We come out of a culture where we wouldn't think of not saying thank you, but at the same time, there's not extra favor because of it. It's what the job is. So he does not show special favor to his servant because his servant is doing his duty, and that's the whole picture. Servants aren't rewarded for doing their duty, and obedience isn't to gain honor or reward. We don't obey God. We don't pray for people for healing. We don't do the things that God has called us to do in whatever the uprooting of the mulberry tree means in our life or the uprooting of the mountain means in our life. We don't do that to get a reward from God. We do it to serve him. And in fact, if we're doing it to serve ourselves, chances are that plant is going to stay right there or that mountain is going to stay right there. Because we haven't matured enough to where God can trust us with the authority. If it's all about us, we'll take the glory. If it's all about him, we'll just go back and continue to do our duty, doing what he has called us to do. And so he's just helping his disciples understand some clear things. Acts of faith and forgiveness are our duty. And don't expect God to show you extra favor because you're doing the basic duty of being a Christian. In Matthew chapter 18, in fact, he told the story of the guy who was forgiven 10,000 talents, and he wouldn't forgive his fellow servant a debt of about 3 months' worth of wages. And it's such a part of our expectation that he says, if you don't forgive your brothers and sisters, the tormentors are released against you. He doesn't talk about that here. He says, that's just your simple duty. In Matthew 18, he says, if you don't carry out your simple duty, you're going to run into tormentors. Sometimes some of the most unforgiving and self-righteous Christians have problems in their life and they blame Satan, because we all like to blame Satan. Because it's not fun to look in the mirror and to say, do I have some negative patterns in my life that is causing, am I reaping and sowing? Am I doing something that the Bible has clearly spoken about that is contrary to good order in the life of my life as a Christian? And as a result, is there some stuff that is coming my way? In the area of forgiveness, there is a clear statement about that. In fact, in the Lord's Prayer, forgive us our debts, trespasses, or sins, depending upon which liturgical background you have come from. Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors, or those who have sinned against us, or those who have trespassed against us. Forgive us our debts in the same way that we forgive others. Ooh. Did you know that when we pray according to the pattern that Jesus gave us to pray, we're saying, you forgive me as much as I forgive other people? When you pray that way, it suddenly highlights the importance. Jesus taught us to pray something that is in our spiritual best interest if we're striving for it, but it's absolutely horrifying if you're not. Now, when you pray that, he's not talking about salvation. Because you are saved, I am saved by grace through faith in Jesus Christ. We are going to step into the presence of the Father because of what Jesus has done. It is by his blood that we have been forgiven. It covers our sins. However, as we now walk as his people in this life, we can take the easy way to conforming to the image of his Son, or we can take the hard way. This was Friday night's message. The easy way is to do it his way. The hard way is to do it our way. And things like tormentors get released. I have often said, don't think I've said it recently, so it's time to say it again. You know, the Roman Catholic Church is not wrong about purgatory. They're just wrong about the location. They think it's in the afterlife. It's here. It's now. It's the laws of reaping and sowing. What they have done is taken the laws of reaping and sowing and say that happens after you pass from this life. No, when you pass from this life, you get into the presence of the Father. You're working through the laws of reaping and sowing now. And for instance, it's easy to find out. Just jump off a building and see if gravity still works. You're reaping the foolishness of ignoring the principle of gravity. Laws of reaping and sowing are in play in the life that we live now, which is why when we look at people that don't even believe that there is a God, we see that people who are walking in a level of righteousness, we call it common grace, that impacts their life, and they understand how the world works, just like the unjust steward knew about how the world works and how important it is to have relationships and friendships. For a very selfish reason, he understood how to be able to do that. So there are people who don't know the Lord who also really do understand how the world works. And they live that way. And they use their finances in a certain way to be able to reap some benefits. And they recognize that we recognize that there are people that are actually blessed because they follow the laws of reaping and sowing, whether they know it consciously or not. And we need to recognize the same thing. Acts of faith and forgiveness are our duty, and if we don't do our duty, we can reap some negative consequences. If we do our duty, though, don't expect God's going to give you extra special favor. You're just doing your duty. I remember back in 1999, we went through that full year. And when you go through something like we did with Hurricane Irene, where the Lord showed us a year in advance that it was coming, it was through dreams and visions, and we're wondering, people are having these bizarre dreams, and you're thinking to yourself, this is the most weird thing I've ever been a part of. And for a year, your faith is growing because God's confronting you with stuff everywhere about the fact that, he's about to do something. I think, what was the movie, Evan Almighty? Was that the one where there was going to be a flood in Washington, D.C., and every time he turned around, there'd be something that would be confronting him about this thing? Well, what God was doing with us was way above what they could even imagine on the television, about the fact that there was going to be a hurricane hitting our area. It was going to hit by surprise. You can read the book. That's what the book's about. But we got through that whole thing after a year of carrying this burden and praying and calling the churches to pray. And we were praying that although, we knew it was going to hit, but we didn't know how big it would be. And when it finally hit at like 75 miles per hour, low-level hurricane, great victory, because lives were spared. People did lose their lives. It was a hurricane, but if it would have been bigger, it would have been far worse, especially because it came by surprise. And you get done with that and you're thinking, my goodness, we were even on television predicting that this thing was going to happen. How is everyone going to look at us now? That's false expectation, because you find out very quickly they just want to move on. Just don't talk about that anymore. People didn't even want to talk about it in our congregation for a season, and I just kept forcing the issue. Because I knew the fact that it was a calling from God that we start praying against hurricanes every year. We start developing our understanding of the prayer authority we have as people of God, and we move on. But if your expectation was that things were going to change, and now we were going to step into some big, powerful, well-known ministry that's well-known for taking on hurricanes, that just wasn't the expectation. And I don't know what my expectation was. My expectation was not that the body of Christ would come to the doors of our church and put little slips of paper underneath saying, beware false prophets. That wasn't my expectation. But that was one of the results. And so you walk away from that going, yeah, this is much different than what I expected. But it's a wake-up call. You know what the Lord said? He said, he's sitting down and we're serving him his meal. He said, yeah, you're doing exactly what you're supposed to do. Get on to your next assignment. It's managing expectation. When you are doing righteous things, the Lord may give you a great deal of favor, he may not. He may say to you when you step into line at the end of the heat of the day and just do an hour's worth of work, I'm going to give you the full pay. He may say to you, if you've borne the heat of the day all day long from the very early morning, I'm going to give you the same pay that I'm giving the guys that have only been here an hour. It's up to him. And all we're doing is the job that he has given us. The disciples needed to hear that. We need to hear that. We need to make sure that we're not becoming stumbling blocks to people, and then we have to get in a place where we understand how you don't be a stumbling block. You keep forgiving, you keep forgiving, you keep forgiving, you keep forgiving, you keep making sure that you are living a life that is focused on other people rather than on your own kingdom building of yourself. And when you do that, you become a kingdom builder for God. And then we'll actually be the faithful servants he wants us to be. Now, when you're a faithful servant, he can trust you with more. There's no doubt. But don't expect instant gratification. Don't expect that suddenly, I've done this big thing for God, and suddenly, you may just be qualified for more turmoil. God may be able to... Remember with the disciples? Remember how they were? They went out and they preached the gospel, they were faithful, and then they got whipped and beaten. And they rejoiced because they were counted worthy. Our way of looking at things is a little bit different than how God looks at things. And the disciples caught on by the time they got to that point where they were rejoicing over the fact that they were counted worthy to suffer for the name of Christ. If we manage our expectations and we do the things that we're supposed to do, we won't be stumbling blocks, but we will be faithful servants. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for the opportunity today to plow through these truths, which help us understand how real life works around us, how your kingdom works around us, how spiritual life works around us. I ask that none of us ever would be a stumbling block to those that are around us. I ask that you would give us eyes to see the traps and the tripping places in our own lives. But more than that, Lord, so that we would be able to see the traps and tripping places we could set up inadvertently for others, I ask that you give us eyes to see in that arena also. And help us to serve you always, being faithful servants of the grace that you have given us. I pray in your name, Jesus. Amen.